The day started like any other Tuesday morning at the Galactic Council's main headquarters. Thousands of beings from hundreds of different species moved through the massive corridors discussing trade agreements, border disputes, and scientific collaborations. The Council had stood for nearly 2,000 years, bringing together civilizations from across the galaxy under one unified government. It was an achievement that most species considered the pinnacle of diplomatic progress. In the central chamber, Ambassador Telvik adjusted his ceremonial robes and prepared for what he assumed would be a routine session. The tall, blue-skinned Zenthari had served on the council for 40 years, longer than most humans had been alive. He had seen countless new species join the galactic community, each one following the same careful process of evaluation, integration, and acceptance. Today's session would review the final application of the newest candidate species, humanity. The humans had discovered faster-than-light travel only 15 years ago, which made them remarkably young by galactic standards. Most species took centuries to develop such technology. The humans had done it in less than 200 years from their industrial revolution. This speed concerned some council members who worried that humanity had advanced too quickly without the wisdom that usually came with age. Telvik had met several human representatives during the application process. They seemed pleasant enough, though their emotions were far more visible than most species he knew. They smiled frequently, laughed at odd moments, and sometimes their eyes would leak water when they felt sad. It was strange behavior, but not threatening. He expected their application to pass with minimal debate. The chamber filled quickly. Representatives from the Korthan Empire took their seats in the eastern section, their crystalline bodies refracting the chamber's light into rainbow patterns. The Villani delegates floated to their designated area, their gaseous forms contained in elegant, transparent spheres. The Thress, covered in thick fur despite the climate-controlled environment, settled into their cushioned platforms. Altogether, nearly 300 species were represented in the room. Council Speaker Morven called the session to order. The ancient Drexian stood at the central podium, his forearms gesturing in the traditional opening pattern. His voice, translated instantly into every language present, echoed through the space. "We gather today to vote on the admission of the species known as humans from the planet Earth. All preliminary requirements have been met, cultural assessments have been completed, trade negotiations have been established, military capabilities have been documented. Does any representative wish to speak before the vote?" Telvik expected silence. He had already reviewed all the documentation. Humanity met every standard requirement. Their technology was adequate, their government stable, their resources sufficient to contribute to the galactic economy. There was no logical reason to delay their admission. But then Ambassador Krenth stood up. The reptilian Sorix was known for his conservative views and his suspicion of newer species. His scales gleamed under the chamber lights as he raised one clawed hand. "I wish to raise a concern," Krenth said, his voice carrying across the chamber. "The humans have demonstrated troubling patterns in their history. Our cultural analysis shows countless wars among their own kind. They have nearly destroyed their own planet through careless resource consumption. They show remarkable violence even in their entertainment. How can we trust such a species within our peaceful community?" Murmurs spread through the chamber. Several representatives nodded in agreement. Telvik felt a twinge of irritation. These were old arguments that had already been addressed in committee meetings. Every species had a violent past. The Zenthari themselves had fought bitter wars before achieving unity. Why bring this up now? Council Speaker Morven gestured for silence. "Ambassador Krent, these concerns were reviewed during the preliminary evaluations. The human species has not engaged in global warfare for over 30 years. They have established planetary government and demonstrated commitment to peaceful cooperation. What specifically troubles you about their current status?" Krent's eyes narrowed. "I propose a different kind of evaluation. One that tests not their technology or their resources, but their character. Let us present humanity with a scenario that reveals their true nature when faced with difficult choices." The chamber erupted in conversation. This was highly unusual. The standard application process had been the same for centuries. Creating special tests for individual species went against established protocol, yet several representatives seemed intrigued by the idea. Telvik stood to speak. "Council Speaker, this is irregular. We cannot change our admission standards for being bigger. It sets a dangerous precedent." "I agree it is unusual," Morvan replied, his deep voice thoughtful. "However, Ambassador Krenth has raised concerns that resonate with some council members. Perhaps a compromise is possible." "Ambassador Krenth, what kind of evaluation do you propose?" Krenth smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. "Something simple. We present the human leadership with a dilemma, a choice that will reveal whether they prioritize their own interests or the greater good. If they pass, I will withdraw my objections. If they fail, we delay their admission for further evaluation. The chamber buzzed with debate. Telvik watched as representatives discussed the proposal in small groups. He could see the appeal of the idea, even if he disagreed with it. Many species were curious about humanity's rapid rise and wanted reassurance about their intentions. After 20 minutes of discussion, Council Speaker Morvin called for order. We will vote on whether to implement Ambassador Krent's proposed evaluation. Those in favor? Telvik watched in dismay as nearly 2/3 of the representatives activated their approval lights. The measure passed easily. Now humanity's admission to the Galactic Council depended not on their technological achievements or diplomatic skills, but on some tests that hadn't even been designed yet. The motion passes, Morvin announced. Ambassador Krent, you will work with the Ethics Committee to develop an appropriate evaluation. It must be fair, clear, and relevant to Council membership. The human representatives will be informed of this development. As the session concluded, Telvik gathered his materials and headed toward the exit. He needed to contact the human delegation and explain this unexpected complication. They had been so close to full membership, just one vote away. Now everything depended on passing a test that nobody had seen yet. He wondered how the humans would react to this news. Would they be angry, disappointed, confused? In his decades of service, Telvik had learned that younger species often struggled with the Council's more complex political maneuvers. Humanity was about to face their first real challenge in galactic politics, and nobody could predict how they would respond. Ambassador Sarah Chen sat in her office aboard the human diplomatic vessel, staring at the message that had just arrived from Council Speaker Morvin. She read it 3 times, making sure she understood correctly. After 15 years of preparation, countless negotiations, and meeting every single requirement, humanity's admission to the Galactic Council now depended on passing some kind of character test. She leaned back in her chair and rubbed her temples. The headache that had started during the morning briefing was getting worse. Her assistant, Marcus Torres, stood nearby with his tablet waiting for instructions. They want to test our character, Sarah said aloud, still processing the information. After everything we've done, all the hoops we've jumped through, now they want to see if we're good enough people. Marcus frowned. What kind of test are they talking about? The message doesn't say. Ambassador Krent is designing it with some ethics committee. We'll know more in a few days. Sarah stood and walked to the large window that overlooked the council station. The massive structure floated in space, a monument to centuries of cooperation between species. She had dreamed of humanity joining that community since she was a child, studying xenopolitics at university. Should we contact Earth? Let the Secretary General know? Marcus asked. Sarah nodded slowly. Yes, but tell her we're waiting for more details before making any decisions. No point in causing panic over something we don't fully understand yet. 3 days later, the test parameters arrived. Sarah gathered her team in the conference room to review them. Besides Marcus, she had brought her senior advisors. Dr. James Wright, a xenoanthropologist who specialized in galactic cultures, and Commander Lisa Park, a military strategist who understood the political implications of council membership. Sarah displayed the test details on the main screen. Here's what they're proposing. The council will present us with a hypothetical scenario involving a moral dilemma. We have to decide how humanity would respond. Our answer determines whether we get admitted or not. That's incredibly vague, Dr. Wright said, adjusting his glasses. What kind of dilemma? What are the evaluation criteria? They haven't specified, Sarah replied. But Ambassador Telvik sent me a private message. He says Krent is designing this to be difficult. The Sorks don't trust us because of our violent history. They want proof that we've evolved beyond our warlike tendencies. Commander Park crossed her arms. So they're judging us based on actions our ancestors took centuries ago? That hardly seems fair. The Zenthari had brutal civil wars. The Korthan Empire enslaved 3 different species before reforming their government. Why are we being held to a different standard? Because we're new, Marcus said quietly. Every established species gets to judge the newcomers. It's probably happened to all of them at some point. Sarah walked to the window again, looking out at the council station. Ambassador Telvik thinks we should accept the test. He says refusing would make us look arrogant or afraid, but he also warns that Krent is clever. Whatever scenario they present will be designed to make us choose between our interests and our principles. Then we choose our principles, Dr. Alina. Wright said firmly, That's the whole point, isn't it? To show we're better than our history suggests. It's not that simple, Commander Park argued. What if the test forces us to choose between saving human lives and helping aliens? What if it puts Earth's security at risk? We represent humanity. We can't just sacrifice our own people to look good to the Council. The room fell silent. Sarah understood Commander Park's concern. As representatives of Earth, they had responsibilities that went beyond impressing alien diplomats. Whatever decision they made would affect billions of humans back home. Let's wait and see what they actually propose, Sarah said finally. No point in arguing about hypotheticals when we'll have a real scenario soon enough. The test arrived 2 weeks later. Sarah was having breakfast in her quarters when the priority message came through. She set down her coffee and opened the file, her heart racing. The scenario was presented as a detailed simulation. A human colony ship had been traveling for 8 years to establish a settlement on a distant world. The ship carried 10,000 colonists in suspended animation, along with equipment, supplies, and genetic materials to start a new society. They were only 6 months away from their destination. But then the Council had discovered something. The planet the humans were traveling to was not uninhabited, as the original surveys suggested. A primitive species lived there, still in early stages of development. They had basic tools, simple language, and small communities. They were just beginning to develop agriculture. In galactic terms, they were infants, thousands of years away from space travel. Under Council law, such species were protected. No advanced civilization could colonize their worlds or interfere with their natural development. The humans had to turn back. But here was the dilemma. The colony ship could not turn back. It had used most of its fuel reaching this point. The ship's systems were designed for a one-way journey. Turning around meant certain death for all 10,000 colonists. They would run out of life support before reaching any safe destination. The Council offered a choice. Humanity could proceed with the colonization, saving their people but violating Council law and dooming the primitive species' independent development. Or humanity could recall the ship, accepting the death of 10,000 humans to preserve Council principles and protect the primitive species. The test gave humanity 72 hours to decide. Sarah read the scenario 3 times, feeling sick to her stomach. This was exactly what Commander Park had feared. A choice between human lives and abstract principles. 10,000 people versus the theoretical future of a species that didn't even know humanity existed? She called an emergency meeting. Her team gathered within the hour, everyone looking grim. They had all read the scenario. "This is impossible," Marcus said, his voice shaking. "They're asking us to kill 10,000 people. How is that a fair test?" "It's designed to be unfair," Dr. Wright replied. "That's the point. Krent wants to prove we'll prioritize our own species over galactic law. Either answer makes us look bad." Commander Park was pacing the room. "We have to save the colonists. We can't just let them die. What kind of government condemns its own citizens to death? But if we violate Council law before we're even members, we'll never be admitted," Marcus countered. 15 years of work, gone. Earth stays isolated from the galactic community. Sarah listened to them argue, her mind racing through possibilities. There had to be another option, some way to save the colonists without violating Council law. But the scenario was carefully constructed to eliminate alternatives. She had checked every detail. For the next 12 hours, Sarah's team worked without rest. They analyzed every word of the scenario, looking for loopholes or alternative solutions. Dr. Wright researched Council law, trying to find precedents. Commander Park consulted with Earth's best engineers about whether the colony ship could somehow be modified or rescued. Marcus coordinated with legal experts back on Earth, searching for any option they had missed. But every path led to the same conclusion. The scenario was airtight. Either the colonists died, or the primitive species lost their chance at independent development. There was no third option. Sarah barely slept that night. She kept thinking about the 10,000 people on that ship. They had families waiting to hear from them. They had left Earth with dreams of building something new, of giving their children a fresh start on a distant world. They trusted their government to protect them. How could she be the person who signed their death warrant? But she also thought about the primitive species on that planet. They had no idea that humanity existed. They were living their lives, slowly building their civilization, just as humans had done thousands of years ago on Earth. If the colonists landed, everything would change. The native species would either be displaced, absorbed, or destroyed. Their chance to develop naturally, to make their own mistakes and achievements, would vanish forever. By the second day, Sarah had to make a decision. She couldn't wait until the last moment. Earth's government needed time to prepare for whatever came next. She called her team together one final time. "I've made my choice," she said quietly. "But before I announce it, I want to hear from each of you." "What would you do?" Marcus spoke first. "I think we have to save the colonists. I know it sounds selfish, but they're our people." The primitive species might develop fine even with human presence. We don't know for sure they'll be harmed, but we know for certain that 10,000 humans will die if we turn the ship back. Dr. Wright shook his head. I disagree. The Council Law exists for a reason. History shows what happens when advanced civilizations contact primitive ones. A weaker culture almost always suffers. We can't build our future on the destruction of another species' potential. That's exactly the kind of thinking that made our own history so bloody. Commander Park was silent for a long moment. I've been thinking about this from a strategic perspective. If we violate Council law, we lose everything. Earth stays isolated. We don't get access to advanced technology, medical knowledge, or galactic trade networks. Millions of humans might die over the coming centuries from diseases we could have cured or conflicts we could have avoided with Council support. 10,000 lives versus millions. The math is brutal, but clear. Sarah nodded slowly. She had expected these answers. Her team was divided, just as humanity would be when the news broke. There was no choice that everyone would accept as right. Thank you for your honesty, she said. Now I'll tell you what I've decided. We're going to recall the colony ship. The colonists will die, and we will follow Council law. Marcus looked devastated. Ambassador, please reconsider. There has to be another way. There isn't, Sarah replied firmly. And here's why I'm making this choice. This test isn't really about the colony ship or the primitive species. It's about what kind of civilization humanity wants to be. If we violate Council law to save our own people, we're telling the galaxy that we only follow rules when it's convenient, that our principles disappear the moment they cost us something real. She stood and walked to the window. Every species in the Council has faced moments like this. Moments where doing the right thing meant terrible sacrifice. The Zentari gave up their most profitable colony world to preserve an endangered ecosystem. The Villani disbanded their military during a war because their weapons were causing collateral damage to civilians. These choices define who they are. Now humanity gets to make that same kind of choice. Dr. Wright leaned forward. You're saying this is about more than just passing the test. Exactly. If we join the Council by sacrificing those colonists, yes, we'll carry that weight forever. But we'll join as a species that proved we can put principles above convenience. That we've genuinely evolved beyond our violent past. And that foundation will shape everything we do in the galactic community for centuries to come. Commander Park stood up, her expression conflicted. What about the colonists' families? What do we tell them? The truth, Sarah said. That their loved ones were asked to make an impossible sacrifice. That they died protecting another species' right to exist. That their loss bought humanity a place among the stars, and we will never forget what it cost. Marcus was staring at his tablet, tears in his eyes. This is going to destroy you politically. Earth's media will crucify you for this decision. Half the planet will call you a murderer. Sarah smiled sadly. Probably. But I didn't become an ambassador because I wanted to be popular. I did it because I believed humanity deserved a place in the larger universe. Sometimes earning that place requires sacrifice. She drafted the message to Council Speaker Morvan carefully, explaining humanity's decision in clear terms.
They would recall the colony ship. They would accept the loss of 10,000 lives.
They would uphold Council law even when it meant terrible cost to their own people. She included a request that the Council help Earth honor the colonists' memory, perhaps by naming the protected planet after them so their sacrifice would be remembered. Before sending the message, Sarah recorded a private communication to the colony ship's captain, explaining the situation and the decision. The captain would have time to wake the colonists, to let them say goodbye to each other and make peace with their fate. It was a small mercy, but it was all Sarah could offer. She sent both messages and then sat back in her chair, exhausted. Marcus, Wright, and Commander Park remained in the room, none of them speaking. They all understood the magnitude of what had just happened. What do we do now? Marcus asked quietly. We wait, Sarah replied. The Council will review our decision. They'll vote on our admission. And then we'll find out if this terrible choice actually meant something. Her hands were shaking as she poured herself water from the conference room dispenser. She had just condemned 10,000 people to death. No matter how sound her reasoning, no matter how many times she told herself it was the right choice, that weight would never leave her. She would carry those lives with her forever. But she also knew that leadership sometimes meant making choices that destroyed you personally but served the greater good. If humanity was going to survive in a galaxy full of older, wiser species, they needed to prove they understood that principle. The response from Council Speaker Morven arrived within 6 hours. Sarah was alone in her office when the message came through. She had sent her team to rest, knowing they would need their strength for whatever came next. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the communication. But the message was not what she expected. Instead of a simple acknowledgement of humanity's decision, Morven requested an immediate private meeting, not a formal council session, but a personal conversation. Sarah quickly accepted and activated the secure holographic communication system. Morvan's image appeared in front of her desk. The ancient Drexian looked tired, his forearms folded in a gesture that Sarah's xenoanthropology training identified as deep contemplation. "Ambassador Chen," Morvan said, his translated voice carrying unexpected warmth. "I have read your decision. Before we proceed further, I must tell you something." The colony ship scenario was not real. Sarah felt the room spin. "What do you mean, not real? There is no colony ship, no primitive species, no impossible choice. It was entirely fabricated as part of the evaluation." "I apologize for the deception, but Ambassador Krenth insisted the test must feel completely real to measure humanity's true character." Relief and anger flooded through Sarah simultaneously. 10,000 people were not going to die. She had not actually condemned anyone, but she had been manipulated, forced to make an agonizing choice based on lies. She took several deep breaths, trying to control her emotions. "I see," she said carefully. "And what did our response tell you about humanity's character?" Morvan's expression was difficult to read, but Sarah thought she detected something like respect in his eyes. "Your decision has caused considerable debate within the council. Ambassador Krenth is not pleased." He expected humanity to choose to save the colonists, which would have proven his argument that your species prioritizes self-interest. Instead, you chose to uphold council law at tremendous personal cost. "So we passed the test?" Sarah asked. "Not exactly." Morvan shifted, his arms moving into a different configuration. "The situation is more complex. Ambassador Krenth now argues that your decision proves humanity is reckless and values abstract principles over practical reality. He claims that a species willing to sacrifice 10,000 of its own people over a hypothetical scenario cannot be trusted with real power in galactic affairs." Sarah felt her anger rising. "With respect, Council Speaker, that argument is absurd. We made the choice we thought was right based on the information provided. How can we be criticized for taking the test seriously?" "I agree," Morvan said, "which is why I am contacting you privately. I want to understand your reasoning more deeply. Why did you make this choice? Many council members assumed humanity would save the colonists. Your own team was divided. You had legitimate arguments for either decision. What made you choose the path of sacrifice?" Sarah considered her words carefully. This conversation might be more important than the test itself. "Council Speaker, I chose this path because I wanted humanity to join the galactic community with integrity. Yes, we could have found justifications to save the colonists. We could have argued that the primitive species might not actually be harmed, or that our people's lives were more valuable because they were our responsibility. Those arguments might even have been convincing." She paused, gathering her thoughts. But they would also have been the easy way out, the convenient choice. "And if humanity's first major decision in galactic politics is to find convenient excuses to break important laws, then what does that say about us? How could anyone trust us in the future?" Morvan listened without interrupting. Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger. "Our species has a violent history. We know this. We've fought terrible wars, destroyed our environment, and committed acts we're ashamed of. But we've also learned from those mistakes. We've built a global government, achieved peace, and developed the wisdom to look beyond our immediate interests. That's what I wanted to demonstrate. Not that we're perfect, but that we've genuinely changed." "Even though the choice would have destroyed you politically? Even knowing your own people would hate you for it?" Morvan asked. "Leadership isn't about being popular," Sarah replied. "It's about making difficult choices that serve the greater good. If I'm not willing to sacrifice my career or my reputation to uphold principles I claim to believe in, then those principles are meaningless. They're just pretty words without substance." Morvan was quiet for a moment. "You understand that many council species have built their reputations on precisely such pretty words? That politics often involves saying one thing while doing another?" "Yes," Sarah admitted. "And I understand why Ambassador Krenth doesn't trust us. His species has probably been betrayed by allies who claim to value honor but abandoned it when convenient. But someone has to break that cycle. Someone has to prove that integrity can exist in politics. I want humanity to be that example. The Drexian's forearms moved in a pattern Sarah didn't recognize. "Tell me something, Ambassador Chen. What would you have done if the scenario was real? If you had discovered after making your decision that the colony ship actually existed and 10,000 humans would die because of your choice?" Sarah felt her throat tighten. She had asked herself this question many times over the past 2 days. "I would have lived with that weight for the rest of my life. I would have attended every memorial service, met with every family member who wanted to confront me, and carried those deaths as my responsibility. But I wouldn't have changed my decision, because the alternative would have meant building humanity's galactic future on the destruction of another species' potential. That foundation would be poisoned from the start. You would accept being remembered as the person who killed 10,000 humans? If that's what doing the right thing required, yes. History can judge me however it wants. I'd rather be remembered as someone who had the courage to make difficult choices than someone who took the easy path and pretended it was moral." Morvan's image flickered slightly as the connection adjusted. "Ambassador Chen, I will be honest with you. When humanity first applied for council membership, I had doubts. Your species developed so quickly, achieved so much in such little time. It seemed impossible that you had also developed the wisdom necessary for galactic citizenship. I thought perhaps you needed more time, more experience, more maturity." He paused, and Sarah held her breath. "But your response to this test has changed my perspective, not because you made the correct choice, whatever that might be, but because you demonstrated genuine moral courage. You were willing to accept terrible consequences to uphold principles you believed in. That is rare, Ambassador. Even among species with thousands of years of civilization? Does that mean the Council will accept our admission?" Sarah asked. Morvan's expression shifted to something that might have been a smile. "The Council will vote in 3 days. I cannot guarantee the outcome, but I will argue strongly for humanity's admission. Your decision has given me the evidence I need to counter Ambassador Krent's objections. However, you should prepare yourself for what comes next. This vote will not be unanimous, and the debate will be intense." "I understand," Sarah said. "Thank you for your honesty, Council Speaker." After the communication ended, Sarah sat in silence for a long time. The colony ship wasn't real. No one had died. The terrible weight she had been carrying was based on a lie. She should have felt relieved, but instead she felt numb. The emotional cost of making that decision had been real, even if the scenario wasn't. She called her team back to the conference room and explained what Morvan had told her. Marcus looked stunned, Dr. Wright seemed thoughtful, and Commander Park's face was unreadable. "So it was all fake," Marcus said quietly. "We went through all that suffering for a test that wasn't even real." "The suffering was real," Dr. Wright corrected. "The scenario was fake, but Ambassador Chen still had to make an impossible choice. She still had to live with the consequences of that decision, at least for a while. That's what they were testing. Whether we could make the hard choice and live with it." Commander Park shook her head slowly. "I'm not sure how I feel about this. They manipulated us. They made us think people would die because of our decision."
"That seems cruel."
"It was cruel," Sarah agreed. "But it was also effective. If I had known the scenario was fake, I couldn't have made a genuine choice. I would have been performing for them, trying to give the right answer. This way they saw who we really are when faced with impossible situations." Over the next 3 days, Sarah prepared for the council vote. She drafted statements, reviewed potential questions, and coordinated with Earth's government about how to handle the outcome regardless of the result. The Secretary General was supportive but worried. Public opinion on Earth was divided. Some people praised Sarah's principled stance, while others were angry that she had been willing to sacrifice human lives even in a test scenario. The media had gotten hold of the story somehow. News outlets across Earth debated whether Sarah had made the right choice. Philosophers argued about the ethics of the scenario. Political commentators discussed what it meant for humanity's future. Sarah stopped reading the coverage after the first day. It was too overwhelming, too personal. On the morning of the vote, Sarah dressed carefully in her formal diplomatic attire. She chose Earth's traditional blue and green colors, representing the planet that had given birth to humanity and that they would always call home. Marcus helped her review her notes one final time, though they both knew she wouldn't need them. This was too important to read from a script. The council chamber was packed. Every representative was present, and several species had sent additional observers. The gallery was full of visitors, journalists, and diplomats from non-member species who wanted to witness this historic moment. Sarah felt hundreds of eyes watching her as she took her place at the designated platform for candidate species. Council Speaker Morvan called the session to order. We gathered to vote on the admission of humanity to the Galactic Council. This vote comes after an unusual evaluation process, one that has sparked considerable debate among our members. Before we vote, I invite Ambassador Krent to present his final arguments, followed by Ambassador Chen, representing humanity. Krent stood, his scales gleaming under the chamber lights. Esteemed council members, I stand before you still convinced that humanity is not ready for membership. Yes, they passed our test by choosing to uphold council law, but consider what this really means. They were willing to condemn 10,000 of their own people to death over a hypothetical scenario. This demonstrates poor judgment and dangerous idealism. He paced as he spoke, his voice carrying across the chamber. Furthermore, humanity's violent history cannot be ignored. They have existed as a spacefaring species for barely 15 years. Most council species took centuries to achieve the stability and wisdom necessary for galactic citizenship. Humanity is rushing forward too quickly, and their decision in our test proves they lack the practical wisdom to handle real crises. Several representatives nodded in agreement. Sarah noticed that most of them were from older, more conservative species. Krent continued, I propose we delay humanity's admission for another 50 years. Let them prove their stability over time. Let them demonstrate that their principles can survive contact with real-world complexity. Then we can reconsider their application. When Krent finished, Morvan gestured to Sarah. Ambassador Chen, you may present humanity's case. Sarah stood and walked to the central platform. She had prepared a long speech defending humanity's readiness and arguing for their admission. But as she looked around the chamber at the hundreds of alien faces watching her, she realized that wasn't what this moment needed. Council members, she began, her voice steady. I'm not going to argue that humanity is perfect. We're not. I'm not going to claim we have all the answers or that we'll never make mistakes. We will. Ambassador Krent is right about our violent history. We have fought terrible wars. We have hurt our planet and each other. These are facts we cannot deny. She paused, making eye contact with representatives around the chamber. But here's what else is true. We learned from those mistakes. We built a global government from hundreds of nations that once fought each other. We stopped wars that had lasted generations. We cleaned up environmental damage that we thought was permanent. We proved that change is possible, even for a species as flawed as ours. The test you gave us was designed to be impossible. There was no right answer, but we made a choice based on the principles we believe in, and we were willing to accept the consequences. Ambassador Krent says this shows poor judgment. I say it shows exactly what humanity has become. A species that understands sacrifice, that values integrity, and that's willing to put principles above convenience. Sarah's voice grew stronger. You're right that we're young. We've only been in space for 15 years. But in that time, we've established peaceful relations with every species we've encountered. We've contributed to scientific research, shared our cultural achievements, and demonstrated our commitment to galactic cooperation. How much longer do we need to prove ourselves? What more can we do to show we're ready? She took a breath. I understand if you vote against our admission today. That's your right. But know that humanity will continue working toward membership. We'll continue upholding our principles.